remember the sound first, before I could put shape to anything. A soft, dripping, slow and steady, like rain slipping from the eaves after a summer storm. Each drop seemed to echo inside my skull, beating against the fever that wrapped my mind in thick, suffocating cotton. For a long time, I floated there between heat and darkness, not quite dead, not truly alive, listening to that small, persistent sound and thinking it might be the world calling me back, or the Lord, or maybe just the roof finally giving way. Then came the coolness. It touched my forehead like the edge of winter, startling against the fire under my skin. The cold cloth pressed there, lifted, dipped again into water, and returned. The simple rhythm cut through the fog in my head, a pattern gentle enough that I almost let myself believe I was a child again. Mama sitting beside me on a pallet in some other cabin, humming low while she laid herbs on my brow. I tried to sink into that memory, let it carry me away from the ache in my bones and the pounding in my skull. But something wasn't right. Mama had been gone a long time. The hands that moved now were not hers. My eyes fluttered open, stubborn and slow, like they'd forgotten how to work. At first, all I saw was blur shapes of light and shadow tangled together in the dimness of my cabin. The dawn was just beginning to press against the cracks in the wall, a pale gray light that made everything look washed and thin. The roof beams hung above me like dark ribs. The chipped clay cup on the crate by my bed leaned at a tired angle. My own breath rasped in my chest, rough as sandpaper. And then I saw her. She was sitting on the rough stool beside my bed, too straight-backed and still to belong in a place like this. A basin of water rested on the floor by her feet. One of my old rags floated inside it, stained and worn, the end twisted in her pale fingers as she wrung it out. Strands of auburn hair had slipped from the tight knot at the back of her head, hanging loose around her face. Her dress, though plain by white folk standards, looked almost foreign in my small cabin, good cotton, soft-looking, the kind that never touched a back like mine. The lace at her throat was yellowed with age, but still something I'd never be allowed to own. Eleanor Whitfield, the master's wife. My heart stopped so suddenly it felt like the fever had finally killed me. For a long, breathless second, I couldn't move, couldn't even swallow. All I could do was stare at her and hear every rule I'd ever been taught screaming in my head. Don't look a white woman in the eye. Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't be alone with her. Don't stand too close. Don't touch. Don't think. Don't even dream. Yet there she was, perched beside my bed, alone in my cabin while the sky was still deciding whether it wanted to be night or morning. I tried to sit up, but my body betrayed me. The fever had turned my limbs to wet rope. My chest burned as if I'd swallowed hot coals, and my head swam so hard the room seemed to tilt. A small, broken sound scraped out of my throat instead of words. I swallowed and tried again. "Please, ma'am," I croaked, my voice thin and ragged, nothing like it sounded in my own head. You shouldn't be here." Her hand moved instantly to my shoulder, pressing me back down with more firmness than I would have expected from someone so slight. I flinched at the contact, not from pain, but from the terror that shot straight through me. If anyone saw this, if the overseer stepped through that door, or worse, if Master Whitfield himself appeared, no explanation would matter. The law of this land didn't care about truth. It cared about appearances, about power, about the fragile, vicious pride of white men. "Lie still, Solomon," she said quietly. She used my name, not boy, not you there, not a gesture or a whistle. My name, the way Mama used to say it, each syllable, clear and whole. It sent a strange shiver through me, one that had nothing to do with fever. "Master Whitfield," I began, forcing the words past my cracked lips. "Will not know," she cut in, her voice low but firm enough that it left no room for argument. Her blue eyes met mine, and for the first time I saw something in them I had never seen directed at me before, not cold appraisal, not irritation, not the distant politeness she sometimes wore when passing through the slave quarters with a handkerchief raised to her nose. Concern, real, sharp, almost frightened concern. "Drink this," she added, lifting a small cup from the crate and holding it to my mouth. The smell hit me first, bitter, pungent, with a sharp bite that cut through the dull, stale air of the cabin. It was nothing like the rough mixtures the old women brewed when someone took sick out in the quarters. This had purpose, strength. I hesitated. Memories rising like ghosts. Men forced to drink things. Before they were sold. Women given powders to quiet their wombs. All the little tricks white folks used to shape our lives without ever asking. She must have seen the doubt in my eyes, because her expression softened, the tight line of her mouth easing just a fraction. "It's willow bark and horehound," she said, "for the fever and the cough. I've used it before. It will not harm you." I didn't know those names. Not really. But there was something in her voice that made me open my mouth anyway. Maybe it was the way her hands trembled just enough to make the liquid ripple in the cup. Maybe it was the fact that I had already spent 3 days lying on this pallet, waiting for death to finish its slow work. Whatever the reason, I let her tip the cup to my lips. The taste was as bad as the smell promised, bitter enough to make my eyes water. I swallowed it down, every muscle in my throat protesting, then coughed hard enough to make my ribs ache. She set the cup back on the crate, then lifted the cloth from my forehead, dipped it in the basin, wrung it out, and laid it lightly across my skin again. "You should not trouble yourself, ma'am," I rasped after a moment, when I could breathe again. I'm just a field hand. They'll find someone else for the rows." The words came out flatter than I meant them to, more tired. Fever had burned away what little pride I usually kept tucked under my tongue. On Whitfield Plantation, a sick slave didn't count for much. If we got better, it was because the Lord wasn't done with us. If we didn't, someone dug a shallow hole on the far side of the north field, and life went on. Her gaze did something strange at that, a small tightening around the eyes, a flicker of something like anger that didn't seem aimed at me. Her fingers paused on my temple, then resumed their steady motion. "On this plantation," she said softly, "nothing is just anything. Every back that bends in the way, fields. Every pair of hands in my kitchen. Every child that grows up under this roof." She stopped, the rest of the sentence dying on her lips. When she spoke again, her voice was cooler, more controlled. "You are not so easily replaced as my husband believes." My husband. She said it like the words were made of thorns. I didn't know what to make of that. It unsettled me, hearing the mistress speak against the master, even in such a small way. White folks might complain about each other in private, but it wasn't meant for ears like mine. Yet here she was, letting the words fall between us in this cramped little room, as if we were equals sharing a confidence. A drop of water slid from the edge of the cloth and traced a cool line down the side of my face. Outside, I could hear the plantation slowly waking, the distant clang of the big bell, the muffled bark of dogs, a woman's voice calling to a child in one of the nearby cabins. The world was moving the way it always did, the same rhythm I'd known for 23 years. Dawn, bell, fields, heat, exhaustion, darkness. Repeat until your body breaks. But inside my cabin, time felt different, slower, sharper, dangerous. Why are you here, ma'am?" I asked, the question slipping out before I could stop it. It was foolish to ask. Curiosity got slaves killed every day, but the fever had thinned the wall between my thoughts and my tongue, and the sight of her sitting there like she belonged in that rough-hewn chair instead of on some velvet settee in the big house was more than my mind could quietly accept. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she wrung the cloth out again, watching the water drip back into the basin. 1, 2, 3 drops. Her hands were small and smooth, unmarked by work. No calluses, no scars from picking cotton or chopping wood or lifting barrels. A gold wedding band clung to her finger, catching the weak light whenever she moved. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, lower, as if she were afraid the walls might be listening. "Because no one else came," she said. I frowned, not sure I'd heard right. "Ma'am? No one else came," she repeated. eyes fixed on the cloth in her hand. "You've been lying in this cabin for 3 days, burning up with fever." Jenkins mentioned it in passing yesterday as he reported the week's numbers. "One of the field hands might die, ma'am." "Solomon. Fever got hold of him. We'll see by Sunday if he's fit to work again." "Like you were a mule with a lame leg." She looked up then, and there was nothing soft in her expression. The concern was still there, but now it burned hotter, edged with a fury that made me forget for a moment who she was. "I asked if anyone had seen to you. He said the quarters women had tried what they could, but they have their own work. The doctor will not ride out for a slave with a fever. My husband said it was a pity, but these things happen." Her lips flattened briefly, then curved into something colder than a smile. "So, I came. Just like that. As if the gulf between us was something she could cross by choice. The way she crossed the yard between the big house and the kitchen garden. I didn't know what to say. Gratitude lodged in my throat, tangled up with fear and confusion, and something that felt too much like hope. I swallowed it all back down, the way I'd learned to swallow every dangerous thing in this place. "You could get in trouble," I managed at last. It felt strange to be the one warning her. A hint of amusement flickered in her eyes, dry as old wood. "I am already in trouble, Solomon," she said. "You simply do not yet know how much." Her words brushed past me then, light as a breeze, leaving only a faint chill behind. I was too tired, too sick, to follow their full meaning. All I knew was this: the master's wife was sitting beside my bed, risking more than I could understand. And every heartbeat that passed with her still there tightened the noose around both our necks. If someone walked in at that moment, if Marcus peeked through the crack in the door, if Jenkins decided to check on the dying field hand, my life would end at the whipping post before the sun reached its highest point in the sky. I knew it as surely as I knew my own name. I didn't yet understand that this moment the cool cloth on my fevered skin, the bitter taste of willow bark on my tongue, the soft rustle of her skirt in the cramped quiet of my cabin was the first stitch in a web that would bind our lives together in ways neither of us could have imagined. I only knew that the world had shifted in some small but terrible way. The master's wife had come to my bed at dawn, and in the brutal law of Alabama, 1834, there was no such thing as an innocent reason for that. By the time the fever broke, the world smelled of damp wood and ashes. My skin was slick with sweat. The pallet beneath me soaked through, and the air in my cabin carried the stale scent of sickness and boiled herbs. Outside, the plantation was already alive, the whip cracks, the shouts, the bell tolling for the field hands to assemble. The rhythm of that sound had ruled my life for 23 years. But this morning, it sounded far away, muffled by the strange stillness that clung to me like another layer of fever. Eleanor Whitfield sat by the door, her hands folded neatly in her lap. I don't know how long she'd been there, but I knew she'd come again before dawn. She always did, moving so quietly across the yard that not even the dogs barked. I used to think nothing on the Whitfield plantation escaped the overseer's notice, but somehow, she slipped through that watchful net every morning, a pale ghost gliding through fog, leaving no trace behind but the faint smell of lavender. At first, I told myself it was just guilt that brought her. The wife of the master tending a slave no one else thought worth saving. Maybe she wanted to ease her conscience before the preacher's next sermon. But as the days passed and my strength returned, that story no longer fit. Her visits weren't quick acts of charity. They were deliberate, measured, a secret rehearsed in silence. That morning, when I managed to sit up without the room spinning, she smiled faintly. "You're stronger today." Her voice was soft, but it carried a strange confidence, not the brittle politeness of a woman used to being obeyed, but something steadier, quieter. I nodded, my throat too dry for words. She rose and poured water from a pewter pitcher into a cup, then handed it to me. Her hand brushed mine by accident. It was cool, steady, clean. "Drink," she said. "You've lost much water." I obeyed, taking small sips while watching her over the rim of the cup. She had tied her hair back that morning, but a few strands escaped again, falling near her cheek. In the dim light, they glowed almost copper. The dress she wore was plain gray cotton, no jewelry save the wedding ring that caught the morning light each time she moved. That ring seemed heavier than it should have been, a circle of gold that bound her to the man who owned everything I could touch, even the air I breathed. "How long have I been sick?" I asked finally. 3 days when I found you," she said. 5 now. I frowned. 5? I tried to imagine how much time had passed. The fever had twisted my sense of it, dreams and reality bleeding together until I couldn't tell one from the other. In my fevered dreams, I'd seen strange things. Mama standing at the riverbank, calling my name. My daughter Lily, older now, her face blurred by sunlight. And sometimes the master himself, whip in hand, smiling as he watched me burn. "Jenkins told me they thought you'd die by Sunday," Eleanor continued, her tone almost clinical. "He said it like one might discuss the weather." I let out a weak laugh that turned into a cough. "That sounds about right." She didn't smile. "You find that acceptable?" "It's not for me to find acceptable, ma'am," I said carefully. "It's just how things are." She studied me for a long time, her head tilted slightly, as though she were trying to see the man behind the words. "And if things were different?" she asked quietly. "If the world were not bound by what is?" I didn't answer. There was no safe answer to that question. A slave's silence was his armor, and mine had kept me alive longer than most. Instead, I looked toward the window, where the pale dawn light filtered through the cracks between the boards, catching the floating dust like specks of gold. Beyond that thin barrier lay the field's endless rows of cotton stretching to the horizon, their white tufts gleaming like ghosts in the mist. I'd been working those fields since I was 7. Mama used to take me out with her, showing me how to pick clean, how to move fast enough to fill the sack but slow enough not to tear the cotton. The overseer called her a good hand. She died in those same fields 12 years later, a heat stroke that nobody bothered to name. The preacher buried her behind the smokehouse, no coffin, just a scrap of pine wood with her initials burned into it. E.W. Once asked if the slaves believed heaven had room for them. I remember thinking, if it does, it better have shade. Eleanor's voice broke through my thoughts. "Do you remember how you fell ill?" I shook my head. "Don't rightly know. One morning I just woke up hot all over. Then the next, I couldn't stand. After that, nothing but darkness and dreams." "You were lucky," she said softly. "Lucky?" I echoed. "Most folks don't call fever luck." "No," she agreed. "But you lived. On this plantation, that's luck." Her words carried a weight she didn't seem to realize she'd let show. I wanted to ask her what she meant, but I could feel something shifting in her mood, a heaviness that filled the room like humidity before a storm. She stood and crossed to the small shelf by the wall, nothing more than 2 planks nailed together. Her eyes scanned the few objects I owned. A tin cup, a broken comb, a wooden carving of a bird I'd made one winter to keep my hands busy. She reached out and touched it, her fingers tracing the wings. "You made this?" "Yes, ma'am. It's beautiful," she said simply. I almost laughed again. That little carving was rough as bark, uneven where my knife had dulled, but she looked at it as though it were something precious, something worth noticing. I didn't know whether to be flattered or afraid. A moment later, her tone changed. "Has anyone else come to see you?" I hesitated. "No, ma'am." "Good." She seemed relieved. "It's better that way." "Better?" I repeated. She didn't answer. Instead, she went back to her stool and smoothed her skirt, eyes lowered. "Solomon," she said after a pause, "I must ask you something, and I need your truth, not what you think I want to hear." That sentence alone was enough to make my chest tighten. White folks didn't ask slaves for truth. They ordered it, shaped it, punished it. But the way she said it, quiet, uncertain, sounded more like a plea than a command. "Yes, ma'am," I said warily. "Do you trust me?" I nearly dropped the cup. Of all the questions in the world, that one had no safe answer. I stared at her, searching her face for the trap I was sure lay beneath those words. But there was no mockery there, no cold superiority, only genuine curiosity, and something else I couldn't name. "I don't rightly know, ma'am," I said slowly. "I don't reckon I've had reason to trust any white person in a long while." Her lips curved in what might have been a sad smile. "That's fair." Then she reached for the basin again, wringing out the cloth. "I'll not ask you to trust me now," she said, "but I hope one day, perhaps, you might understand why I'm here." I didn't know it then, but that was her first confession. A quiet seed dropped in the soil of my doubt, and like all dangerous seeds, it began to take root long before I realized what it would grow into. Over the next few mornings, Eleanor kept coming, always before sunrise, always leaving before the overseer's first call. She brought small things, a heel of cornbread, still warm from the kitchen, a sliver of smoked ham, once even a spoonful of sweet preserves that must have come from her own table. Each time she came, she stayed a little longer. Sometimes she asked about the fields, about the songs the men sang when they picked cotton. Once she asked what the word bukra meant, after hearing the house slaves whisper it when she passed. I answered carefully, watching her face for signs of offense. But she only nodded thoughtfully, repeating the word under her breath like she was storing it away. The fever left me weak, but by the end of that week, I could stand. The first time I walked to the door and looked out, the morning mist was just lifting off the fields. Rows upon rows of cotton stretched under a sky still pink from sunrise. The smell of wet earth hit me hard, grounding me back into the world I knew too well. The plantation looked the same as it always had, neat, cruel, endless. But I was different now, though I couldn't say how. That afternoon, as I sat on the step outside my cabin, Jenkins rode past on his horse. The whip coiled at his side. His eyes flicked toward me, assessing. I kept my head down until he passed. The rules hadn't changed, but I felt something strange, a kind of awareness humming in my chest. The knowledge that someone in the big house had stepped across a line the world said must never be crossed. When Eleanor returned the next morning, she found me sweeping the cabin floor, my strength mostly back. She stopped in the doorway, sunlight spilling around her, and for a heartbeat I could see the dust motes swirling between us, tiny bright things suspended in air, like secrets waiting to settle. She smiled faintly. "You're standing?" "Yes, ma'am." "Then you're ready," she said. "For what?" She didn't answer. Instead, she stepped inside, closed the door softly behind her, and said the words that would change everything. The next morning, the air hung heavy with the smell of rain. Thunder rolled somewhere far off beyond the hills, and the first thin drops drummed softly on the roof of my cabin. I woke before dawn, as I always did now, every sound pulling me from sleep, a habit born from fear as much as caution. Fever had loosened its grip on me, but something new had taken its place, a kind of waiting, a restlessness that had nothing to do with sickness and everything to do with her. She always came before the sun rose high enough for anyone to notice. Her steps across the dew-wet grass were soundless, lighter than the flutter of the mockingbirds in the hedges. Sometimes I thought she moved like a woman already half a ghost, careful, cautious, invisible. That morning, I had been sitting up on my pallet, my back against the wall, staring at the thin line of light creeping in under the door. When it finally widened and her shadow fell across it, I didn't flinch. I'd come to expect her, though I still didn't understand why. She slipped inside, closing the door behind her. The pale blue of her dress was damp at the hem, clinging to her ankles, and her hair, that coppery color that caught every bit of light, had come loose in tendrils from the early rain. She looked less like the master's wife and more like a figure from one of those stories Mama used to whisper about spirits that roamed the earth carrying unfinished business. "You're awake," she said softly. "Yes, ma'am. You should be resting." "I've rested enough." I tried to keep my tone even, respectful, but something inside me rebelled against being spoken to like a sick child. "The overseer will expect me back in the field soon." Her brows drew together. "You're not well enough yet. Well enough for what's asked of me." I looked at her, then really looked. "You've done more than most would, ma'am. But if I stay idle much longer, Someone's bound to ask questions. Her fingers tightened around the handle of the basket she carried. Then I'll make sure they have answers. It wasn't what she said, but how she said it, with a steadiness that didn't belong to a woman in her position, as if she'd already thought through every risk and decided to ignore them all. That scared me more than the overseer's whip ever had. She moved to the small table in the corner, setting down her basket. The faint aroma of bread and smoked meat filled the cabin. My stomach growled, betraying me. She smiled, the faintest curve of her lips, gone almost before it began. Eat. You'll need your strength. I hesitated. You'll get caught bringing things like that here. Then you'd better eat quickly. She turned her back to me, busying herself with the cloth in the basin, and I found myself studying her again. I didn't mean to, it was just that everything about her seemed wrong for this place. Too still, too delicate, like she'd stepped out of a painting and hadn't realized she'd entered hell. But there was something else too, a weariness around her eyes that didn't match her age. I'd seen that look before, on men who'd lost everything but their breath. When she turned back, she caught me watching. For a moment, our eyes met, a simple thing, but one that could have cost me my life in any other circumstance. She didn't look away. Instead, she said something I'll never forget. I know what you are, Solomon. I froze. Ma'am? Her gaze didn't waver. You can read. For a second, the world went utterly still. The drip of water from the roof, the rumble of distant thunder, even my own heartbeat seemed to pause. I felt the air leave my lungs like I'd been struck. I don't know what you mean, I managed finally, though my voice betrayed me. My tongue felt thick, useless. You do. She stepped closer. The floor creaked softly beneath her shoes. I've seen you, Solomon. In the study, when my husband tosses away his newspapers. You linger longer than the others. You trace your fingers over the words. I shook my head. I was just... Don't lie, she cut in. But there was no anger in her tone. When you clean behind the smokehouse, you draw letters in the dirt. I've watched you. The way your hand moves, it's not random. You form words. My stomach turned to ice. Every instinct screamed that this was the end. That she'd set me up, or worse, that she'd test how far I'd go to deny it before she told the master. Literacy was not a mistake on a plantation. It was a death sentence. I'd seen what they did to a man caught with a Bible once. They'd split his fingers so he could never hold a pen again. I started, but she interrupted again, this time with something softer, more fragile. I need your help. Those 4 words didn't make sense at first. I blinked at her, trying to find the trap. My help? She nodded, lowering her voice until it was barely more than breath. My sister in Boston is gravely ill. She wrote to me weeks ago. Her last letter said she may not live through the winter. My husband forbade me from replying. Her eyes darkened. He burns any letters addressed to me. Says my family poisoned my mind with their northern ideals. I have no way to reach her. None. Except you. I stared at her, unable to form words. My mind tried to keep up, but everything she said felt impossible. Ma'am, I said finally, if the master discovers you writing letters, much less through me, he won't, she said quickly. I've thought this through. There's a merchant who travels between here and Montgomery every month. He's sympathetic. If we write carefully, if I disguise the ink in hand, he can send them north. And if someone finds out, then we both hang, she said simply. But she's my sister, Solomon. She's dying. I can't let her die thinking I abandoned her. Her words hung in the air, fragile as glass. I wanted to tell her no, to say that no good could come from this, that I had no wish to die over someone else's secrets. But beneath the fear, something else stirred, a faint spark of pride. She had seen what no one else was supposed to. She had noticed the small, forbidden part of me that I'd spent my whole life hiding, and instead of condemning me for it, she called it something worth using. I can't read much, I lied. Just a few letters. Her lips curved, just slightly. That's not true. I looked away. Why ask me? You have house servants who... None I can trust. she said quickly. And none who can write like you. I turned back sharply. You don't know that. I do, she said. You speak differently, Solomon. Your mother taught you well. The mention of my mother hit me like a slap. I hadn't spoken her name to anyone in years, not since the night she died with my hand in hers and the overseer shouting for us to get back to work before dawn. How would you know that? I asked around. Quietly. She hesitated. She once served in the house of a northern teacher, didn't she? I didn't answer, but my silence told her everything. She taught you, Eleanor said, and you kept that knowledge alive all these years. You read what scraps you could find. You traced words into the dirt. You built something inside yourself that no one could take away. Her voice was trembling now, but not with fear, with conviction. It was as if she'd uncovered some secret truth in the act of saying it. I didn't know what to do with that kind of recognition. No white person had ever spoken to me like that, not as property, not as labor, but as someone capable of thought. It was terrifying. Finally, I said, "You're asking me to risk my life." "Yes. And what do I get in return?" She blinked, taken aback by my bluntness. "You'll have my gratitude." "Gratitude won't save me from the whip, ma'am." Her mouth tightened. "Then what would?" I hesitated, the image of my daughter flashing in my mind, Lily, with her dark braids and shy smile, her small hand clutching mine the day they tore her away. "Information," I said, quietly. "You go places I can't. You hear things I never will. My daughter was sold 3 summers ago to the Harrington plantation. If she's still there, if she's alive, you could find out." Eleanor's expression softened. "I can try. That's all I ask." For a long moment, we stood in silence, the thunder rumbling closer outside. Then she nodded once, slow and deliberate. "We have an agreement." When she left, I sank onto the pallet, trembling not from sickness this time, but from the weight of what I'd just done. I had bound my life to the master's wife, a woman as trapped in her world as I was in mine, and neither of us could yet see how the storm we'd called down would change everything. The next few mornings passed in a strange silence. The fever was gone, yet I couldn't shake the heat that lingered beneath my skin. It wasn't sickness now, it was fear. The kind that sits in your belly and waits, coiled, whispering what-ifs until even the sound of your own breath feels like a risk. I thought she wouldn't come again, after what was said between us. Maybe she had realized the danger. Maybe she'd sobered from that desperate courage and seen the truth of what she was asking. A white woman conspiring with a slave could destroy not just her reputation but her life. And mine would end at the post before sundown. But she came. Of course she did. It was the 3rd morning after our conversation when I heard the soft knock on the door. 3 taps measured, deliberate. My heart stuttered. I moved quickly, sliding the loose plank back into place over the small hiding space where I kept Mama's bead and my wooden carving. Then I opened the door. Eleanor Whitfield stood there wrapped in a gray shawl, her face pale from the early chill. The mist was thick that morning, rising from the fields like ghosts, clinging to her skirts. She looked like a spirit who'd lost her way between worlds. "May I come in?" she whispered. I stepped aside. She crossed the threshold quickly, closing the door behind her. Then, with a small exhale, she removed her shawl and set down the basket she carried. From inside, she drew out what looked like contraband of the highest order sheets of cream-colored paper, a small inkwell, 2 quills wrapped in linen, and then something else, a slim, leather-bound book worn soft from handling. I stared at the objects as if they were live coals. "What are you doing?" I asked. "What we agreed upon," she said. "You'll write for me." My hands trembled before I even reached for the paper. I hadn't touched proper stationery in years, not since the time I'd been hired out to a clerk in Montgomery for a season. He'd paid my master well for the labor, but never knew that while I swept his office and filed his ledgers, I'd watched his pen move, memorized the slant of his letters, copied the shapes in dust when no one was looking. Mama used to say, "Words are like fire, boy bright when you need light." Deadly when they catch the wrong thing. She was right. Eleanor unfolded a sheet and laid it flat on the table. I will dictate. You'll write in a hand that could pass for mine. I hesitated. If anyone finds these, they won't, she said quickly. I'll keep them hidden until the merchant comes again. He'll carry them north with his orders for fabrics and books. He owes me favors. Her tone was steady, but her fingers betrayed her tight around the edge of the table, knuckles pale. For the first time I saw that she was just as frightened as I was. Before we begin, I said, I want to remind you of our bargain. She looked up sharply. My daughter, Lily, I continued. You said you'd try to find her. The Harrington plantation. 3 summers ago. Eleanor nodded. I remember. Do more than try, I said quietly. Promise me. She studied me for a long moment, and in that silence the only sound was the rain beginning to fall against the roof, soft, persistent, like the beating of distant drums. Finally, she said, I promise. Something loosened in my chest then, though I couldn't tell if it was hope or surrender. Very well, I said. Tell me what to write. She drew in a breath, steadying herself. Begin with the date October 3rd, 1834, and address it to Catherine Summers, Boston, Massachusetts. I dipped the quill into ink. The familiar weight of it in my hand felt both foreign and intimate, like holding a piece of my past I thought I'd buried. The first stroke on the page sent a shiver through me. The motion came back easily, muscle and memory guiding the pen. Dearest Catherine, she began, voice trembling. Your letter reached me, though my reply must travel under shadows. I pray this finds you stronger than the last. The days here are long, the nights longer still, I wrote as she spoke, the words unfurling across the page in neat loops. She dictated cautiously, avoiding details that might betray her location or the truth of her husband's cruelty. When she spoke of the plantation, she described it as a southern estate, too genteel a phrase for what it truly was. When we finished the first page, she sat back, studying my handwriting. Then she smiled a real smile, small but alive. You mimic a woman's hand perfectly. My mother taught me several styles, I said. Said a man ought to know how to speak with more than his tongue. Your mother sounds remarkable. She was, I said simply, until the fields took her. Eleanor lowered her gaze, and for a moment, the distance between mistress and slave seemed to vanish. We were just 2 people haunted by loss. Solomon, she said softly, you should know something. She reached for the small leather book. This belonged to another woman who knew what it meant to live between silence and speech. She handed it to me. The cover was cracked with age, the title barely legible. Poems on various subjects, religious and moral. Phyllis Wheatley, she said. A slave who wrote poetry in Boston decades ago. They made her prove her intellect before a panel of men who refused to believe a black woman could write such beauty. She became the first of her kind to publish. I opened the book carefully. The pages smelled of dust and ink, faintly sweet, like old tobacco. The words swam before my eyes. 'Twas mercy brought me from my pagan land. I frowned. Mercy? She wrote. Within the boundaries they allowed her, Eleanor said quietly. But if you read closely, you'll find rebellion between the lines. I turned another page, reading in silence. Something stirred inside me, not joy, not exactly, but recognition. Here was proof that even within bondage, someone had carved her name into history, using nothing but words. You shouldn't have. This, I said finally. No, she admitted, but neither should you know how to write. Yet here we are. A strange sound left me a short, rough laugh that felt foreign in my throat. We're both breaking rules then. Yes, she said, almost smiling. And perhaps we'll both pay dearly for it. Rain pattered harder against the roof, drowning out the world beyond the cabin walls. For a moment, it felt like the sound might wash us clean of the danger we were courting. When we finished the second letter one, she insisted on writing for a merchant contact to disguise the true purpose of the first. She gathered the pages carefully and pressed them between two old hymn sheets. "I'll hide them in my sewing basket until he comes." I watched her wrap the ink and quills back in cloth, her movements precise. She handled each item like a weapon that could both save and destroy her. Before she left, she paused at the door. "You asked me once why I'm here," she said without turning. "The answer is because I owe a debt. Not to you yet, but to truth. I was raised among people who spoke of freedom as a gift from God. Then I married a man who built his wealth on chains. Every morning I wake and wonder how much longer I can breathe this poisoned air." Her voice faltered. "Writing these letters, it's the first thing that's felt like breathing again." I didn't know how to answer that. When she was gone, I sat alone with the book of poems open on my lap. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper, the air cooling with the approach of dawn. I traced my finger over the words on the yellowed page, mouthing them silently. In every human breast, God has implanted a principle which we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance. Freedom. The word glowed in the dim light like a live ember. I thought of Lily, my little girl. 3 summers gone, her braids bouncing as she ran through the tall grass. I'd promised her once I'd find her. Maybe this was the start of that promise being kept. That night, as I hid the book under my pallet beside Mama's bead, I felt something shift deep inside me. Fear was still there, but it had a companion now. Purpose. The pact between me and the mistress had been sealed not in blood, but in ink. And ink, I was learning, could be just as dangerous. By the time 3 weeks had passed, I had learned to measure time not by the sun's climb across the sky, but by the soft sound of her footsteps in the grass outside my door. Eleanor came like clockwork before dawn, before the overseer's first call, before the world remembered what we were supposed to be. Those early hours became something else entirely, something suspended between sin and salvation. The plantation around us carried on, blind to the quiet rebellion growing in my cabin. The men still bent their backs in the fields until sweat ran down their spines like rainwater. The women still cooked in the smokehouse, their hands scarred from boiling pots and open fires. The overseer's whip still cracked in the air, slicing through the day's hum like lightning. And through it all, Eleanor and I built a bridge of words, a bridge made of ink and fear, letters that slipped northward like whispers escaping a locked room. The first letter to her sister had been sent through the merchant, folded neatly among invoices for glassware and bolts of silk. Eleanor told me he was a cautious man, one who believed in certain causes, but believed even more in profit. That suited me fine. Profit, I could trust. Passion was too dangerous a motive. Each week she brought new scraps of news from the big house who'd visited, which merchant had been to town, what gossip floated among the wives during their tea. I listened closely, not because I cared for the lives of the Whitfield's kind, but because sometimes, hidden in their small talk, were clues about larger clues about movements, shipments, visits, chances, opportunities. I had learned something in those years of bondage. Freedom didn't come like a trumpet's call. It came in fragments, in overheard words and brief silences, in the moments when the people who owned your body forgot you could think. It was on one of those gray mornings, when the mist hung so thick over the fields it looked like the earth itself was trying to hide, that Eleanor arrived with a light in her eyes I hadn't seen before. She didn't sit as she usually did. Instead, she stood by the door, her breath quick, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "I have news," she said. I set down the broom I'd been using to sweep the floor. "What kind of news?" "About Lily." For a moment, I thought I'd misheard. Her name, my daughter's name, hung in the air like a word from another world. I hadn't spoken it aloud in years, afraid it might dissolve if I gave it sound. "Lily," I repeated, the syllables dry on my tongue. "You found her?" Eleanor nodded, stepping closer. "She's alive, Solomon." I gripped the edge of the table to keep from falling. Alive. The word echoed through me like thunder. I had pictured her grave too many times, imagined her small body buried beneath the red earth of some nameless field. Yet here was Eleanor, saying she lived. Where? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. The Harrington plantation, she said, just as you told me. My friend Martha Harrington mentioned her in a letter without realizing who she spoke of. She wrote that her husband recently moved a young house servant from field labor into the main house. A girl called Lily. Bright, quick, uncommonly clever for her age, she said. Reads to her mistress in the evenings. I felt my breath catch. Reads? Eleanor nodded again. Someone there has been teaching her. I sank onto the stool, my knees weak. My mind flooded with images of Lily as I'd last seen her 9 years old, small for her age. Her braids uneven, because she never sat still long enough for her mother to finish them. I could still feel the weight of her hand in mine the day the traitor came. She'd clung to me, sobbing, until the overseer pried her fingers loose one by one. She's learned to read, I murmured. Lord help her. It was both a blessing and a danger. A slave who could read walked a knife's edge. Knowledge could set you free or mark you for death. Eleanor seemed to read my thoughts. She's safe for now. The Harringtons are not kind, but they are cautious. A literate servant can be useful if kept quiet. I nodded slowly, though my heart was pounding. Thank you, I said finally, the words small, inadequate. You've done more than I ever thought possible. Her expression softened. It's not enough yet. She reached into the pocket of her dress and drew out a folded piece of paper. Martha also mentioned something else. The Harringtons are attending the harvest ball here next month. They often bring their house servants. The implication hit me like a bolt. Lily might come here. Yes, she said, her voice trembling with restrained hope. If she does, you might see her again. For a long moment, I couldn't speak. The thought was too large, too dangerous to hold. To see my daughter after 3 years here, on this cursed land, it was a miracle and a curse all at once. I don't know what I'd do, I whispered, if I saw her. Then, perhaps, Eleanor said slowly, you should start thinking about it, because I have another plan, one that goes beyond letters. She unfolded another piece of paper from her basket, a small hand-drawn map, the ink faint but precise. My cabin, the cotton fields, the river road leading north toward Montgomery. I've been writing more than my sister's letters, she confessed. There's a conductor who travels between here and Montgomery. He poses as a livestock trader, but he works for the Underground Railroad. I've arranged a meeting. He's agreed to help, if we can reach him. I stared at her, stunned. You mean to run? Yes, she said simply. And I want you and Lily to come with me. The words hung there, unbelievable. For a moment, I thought the fever had returned, that I was hallucinating again. You can't be serious. I am. Eleanor, do you have any idea what they'll do if we're caught? Her jaw tightened. I know exactly what they'll do. My husband would see me dead before he let me disgrace his name, but I can't live like this anymore. Not after what I've seen, not after what I've learned from you. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. I've sold pieces of my jewelry through the merchant. Enough for passage north. My mother's cousin in Boston will take me in. We'll use the harvest ball as cover. So many guests. So much. Movement. It's the only chance we'll have. I shook my head, pacing the small room. You're talking about escaping Alabama. About crossing half the country with slave catchers on every road. With your husband's money. His dogs. His men chasing us. That's not a plan, that's suicide. Her gaze was steady, unwavering. Perhaps, but staying here is a slower kind of death. I turned away, my chest aching with the weight of it. Freedom had always been a word I kept locked behind my ribs, too dangerous to let out. Now she was handing it to me like a loaded pistol and asking me to aim it at everything that kept us bound. You said the conductor works through Montgomery? I asked finally. Yes. That's 4 days' travel on foot, maybe 5. The patrols. I know, she interrupted. That's why we'll go during the ball. Everyone's attention will be on the guests. The household will be chaos. We can slip out unseen. I stared at her for a long time. Part of me wanted to believe it, to picture Lily's hand in mine, her small voice asking questions about the northern sky. But another part of me saw only blood, the lash, the hangman's rope, the fire. Eleanor reached out suddenly, her hand brushing mine. The contact was brief, electric. "If we succeed, Lily will grow up free," she said, her voice breaking. "She'll learn to read without fear. She'll have a life neither of us could." That image, Lily free, standing in a world that didn't chain her mind, was too much. It cracked something open inside me. I didn't promise her anything that day. I couldn't. But when she left, I watched from the window as she crossed the yard, her gray shawl blending into the mist. I thought of the book she'd given me, of Wheatley's words. "It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance." That night, as I lay awake listening to the rain, I whispered a prayer not to be saved, but to be brave enough to try. I felt the change before I ever saw it. The plantation air carried a different weight that week, thicker, meaner, full of the kind of silence that comes before a storm. The men moved faster in the fields. The women kept their eyes lowered longer, and even the dogs seemed to bark at shadows. Rumor had a way of slipping through cotton rows like wind through grass, and I could tell something dark was brewing in the big house. I didn't yet know that our secret had already begun to unravel. Eleanor still came in the gray light of morning, but she was no longer calm. Her hands shook when she set down the basket, and her eyes darted toward the door every few seconds. One dawn she arrived with a bruise on her wrist, small, purple, and shaped like a man's grip. She kept it hidden under lace, but when she reached to hand me a folded sheet of paper, the sleeve slipped, and I saw it. I didn't say a word, neither did she. Some truths sat between us unspoken, burning hotter for their silence. The letters had grown riskier. Every page we wrote felt like a knife pressed to our throats, yet she refused to stop. "If I stop," she whispered, "he wins." I didn't ask who she meant by he, the master, the world, or God himself. Maybe all three. Marcus was the first shadow to move against us. He'd always been a sly man, sharp eyes, smooth tongue, and the master's favor tucked into his pocket like a talisman. When other slaves whispered about running, he was the one who carried word to the overseer. When punishments were handed out, Marcus was there to watch, smiling like a man counting coins. I'd caught him once near my cabin after dark, pretending to fetch wood. He'd greeted me with that same slick grin, all teeth and no warmth. Since then, I'd felt his gaze on me like a knife between my shoulders. The morning it happened started like any other. Mist hung low over the cotton fields, turning everything the color of ashes. Eleanor arrived pale and breathless. "Charles returned early from Montgomery," she said. "He's furious. A business deal failed. You must be careful." Her voice trembled, but she still produced another letter, her fingers smudged with ink. "This will be the last before the harvest ball," she whispered. "After that, we move." I took the page, feeling the tremor of her hand as it brushed mine. "We should wait," I said. "He'll be watching everything now." "We have no time to wait," she replied, her eyes flashing. "Catherine is dying. The conductor leaves Montgomery in 2 weeks. If we miss him, there won't be another chance until spring. I won't stay here that long." I wanted to argue, but before I could, there was a sharp knock at the door. 3 times hard, impatient. Eleanor's face went white. She gathered the papers in one quick motion, shoving them beneath a loose board in the floor. "Who is it?" I called, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jenkins," came the overseer's drawl. "Master wants you up at the house. Both of you." "Both." The words sank like a stone. Eleanor straightened her dress, smoothing her sleeves with shaking hands. "Say nothing," she murmured. "Follow my lead." When she opened the door, Jenkins stood there, hat in hand, rain dripping from the brim. His eyes flicked from her to me, unreadable. "Master's been looking for you, ma'am. Seems concerned about your whereabouts." The way he said concerned made the hair rise on my arms. I was instructing Solomon about the guest quarters for the harvest, Eleanor said smoothly. We'll need extra bedding and firewood. Jenkins gave a slow nod. Yes, ma'am. Master's in his study. Then his gaze landed on me. He wants to see you too, boy. Eleanor's fingers brushed my arm. A small, secret pressure meant to steady me before she followed Jenkins out into the rain. I wiped my palms on my trousers, took a deep breath, and stepped into the storm. The big house loomed ahead, its white columns gleaming wet under the gray sky. I'd walked that path hundreds of times, carrying firewood or mending chairs, but never like this. The air itself felt watchful. As I approached the veranda, I saw Marcus standing near the carriage, talking low with the master. Their heads turned in unison when I came into view. Marcus's grin flickered across his face, triumph disguised as obedience. Inside, Jenkins said, jerking his chin toward the front door. The study smelled of bourbon, leather, and smoke. Charles Whitfield sat behind his desk, a tumbler half empty in his hand. Eleanor stood near the window, her back straight, her face a mask carved from marble. I could see her reflection in the glass, eyes wide, jaw tight. "Do you know why you're here?" the master asked me. "No, sir." I kept my eyes on the floorboards, the way a man does when his life depends on pretending not to see. He rose slowly, swirling the drink in his glass. "Marcus tells me you've been enjoying rather private conversations with my wife, that she visits your quarters frequently, sometimes before dawn." His tone was calm, almost pleasant. That was worse than shouting. A calm white man in anger was a blade wrapped in silk. "Mrs. Whitfield has been given me instructions for the harvest, sir," I said carefully. "Preparations for the guest cabins." Whitfield's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Interesting. Jenkins has managed such matters for 7 years. Yet suddenly my wife needs you." He set the glass down, came around the desk, and stopped so close I could smell the liquor on his breath. "Tell me, Solomon, do you read?" My heart stopped. "No, sir." "Liar." He yanked open a drawer and pulled out the worn leather book Phyllis Wheatley's poems. My world tilted. "I found this in your quarters," he said, holding it up. "A book of poetry, abolitionist filth, given to you by my wife." Eleanor stepped forward. "Charles, please, you're mistaken." The crack of his hand across her face was so sudden it stole the air from the room. She stumbled against the wall, one hand pressed to her cheek, but she didn't cry out. Only a small sound escaped her, half shock, half fury. I said, "Silence." His voice turned sharp, the veneer stripped away. "I'll deal with you momentarily." He turned back to me. "Who taught you to read?" I swallowed hard. "My mother, sir. Long before we came here." He studied me, eyes narrowed. "So the sickness in you runs deep." Before I could answer, the door opened again. Marcus entered, carrying a bundle of papers, our letters, the map, everything. He laid them neatly on the desk, bowing slightly. "Found these under a loose floorboard, master." Whitfield's gaze moved over the pages, his face darkening with every line he read. When he looked up again, the calm was gone. Plotting escape, writing letters north. My own wife planning to flee with a slave. "Charles, it's not what you—" "Enough!" he roared. The sound rattled the glass in the window panes. "Jenkins!" The overseer appeared almost instantly, as if summoned by the devil himself. "Take this man to the post. 50 lashes. I want every hand on the plantation to watch. Let them learn what becomes of those who forget their place." "Yes, sir. And after that," Whitfield added, his voice dropping to a chilling calm again, "send word to Montgomery. I'm selling him downriver. The sugar plantations pay well for strong backs and broken spirits." Eleanor gasped. "Charles, no! You can't! He has a child!" Whitfield turned on her, gripping her wrist until she cried out. "I can do whatever I please with my property, including you." He shoved her toward the door. "You'll remain in your room until I decide whether to send you to Mobile. The asylum there has fine treatments for disobedient wives." Her eyes met mine as Jenkins seized my arm. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth where his ring had cut her skin. In that moment she looked both fragile and unbreakable. "I'm sorry," her gaze seemed to say. Then she was gone, the door slamming behind her. Jenkins dragged me outside. Rain hammered the yard, turning the earth to mud. The overseer's grip was iron, but my mind was far away already with Lily, with the promise I'd made, with the book that had damned me. As the other slaves gathered, their faces blurred by the downpour, I caught sight of Marcus standing under the veranda, dry and smug, watching. Betrayal had its own reward on this land. When they tied my hands to the post, I felt the rough wood bite into my wrists. I told myself not to cry out. Pain was the only thing left that belonged wholly to me. Whitfield appeared on the porch, bourbon in hand. "Begin," he said. The first lash split the air, then skin. A fire tore through my back. I clenched my jaw until my teeth ached. The second came, then the third. The world narrowed to sound and pain, the crack, the wet slap, the intake of breath from the crowd. By the 10th, I couldn't tell where my body ended and the rain began. But I held on to one thought, the only one that mattered. Lily lives. She reads. She will know my name. When darkness crept at the edges of my vision, I whispered Wheatley's words into the storm. In every human breast, God has implanted a principle we call love of freedom. It is impatient of oppression and pants for deliverance. They whipped me until the words turned to silence. I remember the rain most of all, heavy, unrelenting, washing over the yard like the sky itself wanted to drown out what was happening. The sound of it striking the ground was louder than the whip, louder than the shouts, louder even than my own heartbeat that pounded like a drum of defiance somewhere deep inside my ribs. They tied me to the post in front of everyone. The overseer, Jenkins, wound the rope so tight around my wrists that my hands went numb. The rough bark bit into my skin, wet from rain and blood. I could smell the iron in the air, sharp, metallic, the scent that always follows violence. Around me, the plantation gathered in silence. Men, women, children, all standing in the mud, eyes down, faces blank. No one dared speak. No one dared move. To flinch was to be noticed, and to be noticed was to suffer. 50, Jenkins said flatly, holding up the whip. The handle gleamed black with oil, the lashes curling like snakes. I'd seen it used on others, never thought I'd feel its full weight. I didn't look at Whitfield. I could feel his presence behind me, standing on the veranda with his bourbon, watching like a man admiring the efficiency of a machine he owned. I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing my fear. The first strike came like lightning. I didn't scream. Not yet. The pain was a flash, sharp, bright, all-consuming, then a second of silence before the burn set in. The second lash followed before the first had finished echoing. By the third, my breath came in ragged bursts. By the fifth, the world had narrowed to nothing but pain and rain and the smell of wet earth. Someone in the crowd sobbed. A woman's voice. Jenkins barked at her to hush. I fixed my eyes on the ground, on the rivulets of water running red between my feet. Every drop that fell carried a piece of me with it. I counted the lashes in my head, not to track the pain, but to keep hold of my mind. 10, 11, 12. Somewhere around 15, I stopped feeling the whip as pain and started feeling it as rhythm. The crack, the sting, the echo, over and over until it became a terrible kind of music. By 20, I could taste blood in my mouth. My knees trembled, but I stayed upright. I thought of Lily, her laugh, high and bright as summer wind, the way she used to press her small palm against mine and say, "Your hand's a map, Papa. Lines everywhere." I thought of her tracing my calluses, of her mother braiding her hair by lamplight. Those memories built a wall between me and the pain, brick by brick, until only fragments of the present slipped through. Thunder rolled overhead, drowning out the next lash. I welcomed it. The storm was the only thing loud enough to hide my breath. At 25, Jenkins paused to wipe the rain from his brow. The crowd shifted uneasily. Even the children looked sick. We all knew the ritual: half the lashes to break the body, the other half to break the spirit. I refused to give him that second half. I whispered Wheatley's words through cracked lips, each line a prayer. Through thickest glooms look back, immortal shade. The words steadied me. A woman who'd lived and died in bondage had left behind a torch, and I clung to its faint flame. When Jenkins raised his arm again, a voice rang out from the big house. It was Eleanor. "Stop!" The sound sliced through the storm like a blade. Heads turned. She stood on the porch, soaked to the bone, her dress clinging to her frame. Her face was pale, lips trembling, but her eyes blazed. "Enough, Charles! You'll kill him!" Whitfield's reply was calm, cold, like ice cracking. "That's the idea." He didn't even look at her as he waved his hand for Jenkins to continue. The whip cracked again. Eleanor's scream followed it. I felt each sound as if it struck both of us. When it was over, 50 lashes by Jenkins's count, though it felt like 500, they cut me loose. My knees buckled, but I didn't fall. 2 men came forward to drag me away. I didn't know their names, only that they were careful with me, their movements quiet, reverent. One murmured, "Hold on, brother," before they carried me toward the quarters. The rain had turned the yard into a sea of mud. I could barely tell where the earth ended and my blood began. Somewhere behind me, Whitfield's voice rose again, giving orders, something about Montgomery, about the trader who'd arrive within the week. "Sold downriver," he'd said. "The sugar fields." I knew what that meant. Few who went south ever returned. It wasn't labor there, it was death with rhythm. They laid me down in my cabin, on the same pallet where I'd once fought fever. I was shaking so hard I could barely breathe. Someone pressed a rag to my back, whispering prayers in a language older than this land. I recognized the voice. It was Mary, one of the women from the cookhouse. She wept as she worked, tears mixing with the water she used to clean the wounds. "You fool, man," she muttered through her tears. "You and that white lady done signed your own death." I couldn't argue. I couldn't even speak. The world drifted in and out of focus. Mary's face above me, the candlelight flickering on the walls, the steady patter of rain outside. Then darkness swallowed it all. When I woke, the storm had passed. My back burned with every breath. I tried to move, but the pain pinned me down. The room smelled of smoke and lye. A bandage had been wrapped around me, rough and uneven. My mouth was dry, my body weak, yet somehow I was alive. Mary sat beside me, her hands folded in her lap. She looked at me with something between pity and respect. "He means to sell you," she said quietly. "Word's gone to Montgomery already. Trader'll be here by week's end." I closed my eyes. "Then it's done." She shook her head. "Ain't done till you stop breathin'. You hear me?" Before I could answer, footsteps sounded outside. Light feet. Careful. Then a whisper through the cracks of the door. "Solomon. Eleanor." Mary's eyes went wide. She slipped away through the back before the mistress entered. Eleanor stepped inside, her lantern throwing soft gold across the small room. She looked worse than I'd ever seen her, her cheek bruised, her lips split, her eyes swollen from crying. But she was alive. "I had to see you," she said, closing the door. "He's sending you away." "So," I heard. My voice was rough, barely more than a growl. "I can stop it," she said desperately. "I'll pay the trader. I cut her off with a bitter laugh that turned into a cough. "You can't buy what he already thinks he owns. He'll just send someone else." Tears filled her eyes. "Then I'll go with you. I'll run tonight." "No." I shook my head, the motion sending pain through my spine. "You'll do nothing of the sort. You'll live. That's how you fight him." She fell silent, her chest rising and falling with uneven breaths. Then she reached into her dress and pulled out something small, a folded piece of paper, wrapped in cloth. "It's from Martha Harrington," she said. "A reply. She's bringing Lily here. She'll be in the carriage with her when they come for the harvest ball." My breath caught. Lily. Here. Yes. I swear it. She'll arrive within days. I'll find a way to see that she knows you're alive. I turned my face toward the wall, afraid that if I looked at her, I'd believe it, that I'd let hope in again. You shouldn't be here, I whispered. If he finds out, he already has, she said. Marcus told him everything. But it doesn't matter. I'll find a way to make this right. I promise you, Solomon, I will. Her words broke something in me, not from anger, but from the unbearable kindness of them. I wanted to hate her, to blame her for the ruin that had fallen on us both, but I couldn't. We were two souls caught in the same snare, both paying for the sin of wanting more than the world allowed. When she left, I stared at the ceiling, tracing the cracks in the wood with my eyes. The candle burned low, sputtered, and went out. In the darkness, I saw Lily's face, not as a child, but older, standing in a place I'd never seen, her hands clutching a book. She looked at me with my own eyes and said, "You kept your word, Papa." I didn't know if it was dream or prophecy. I only knew that even if my body broke, that vision was something they couldn't take. By dawn, the ropes on my wrists had left deep grooves. My back throbbed with each heartbeat. But when the cock crowed and the plantation stirred to life, I pushed myself upright. I would not meet the traitor crawling. If I was going to be sold to death, I'd walk to it on my feet. Somewhere in the distance, the bell tolled for work, and above it, faint but clear, I thought I heard a girl's laugh carried on the wind, a sound like memory, or maybe mercy. They came for me 2 mornings later. The sky was pale gray, the kind that makes everything look faded, the cabins, the fields, even the faces of the people watching. I was sitting on the edge of my cot when I heard the wagon wheels grinding up the dirt road. The trader's arrival was never a quiet thing. The horses snorted clouds of steam in the cool dawn. The men's voices carried across the yard, and every slave who heard it knew what that sound meant. Someone was about to vanish. Mary burst into my cabin without knocking. "He's here," she whispered. "Don't you move, Solomon. Don't give him the satisfaction of seeing you beg." "I won't beg," I said quietly. She tried to smile, but her eyes were wet. "You better not die neither." Before I could answer, Jenkins appeared in the doorway. His face was unreadable, but I could see something like pity flicker behind his hard eyes. "On your feet," he said. I rose slowly. My back screamed with each movement, the raw flesh beneath the bandages pulling tight. I'd barely healed enough to stand straight, but I would not bow. Not today. If they were taking me to the river, I'd walk to it like a man. Outside, the yard was already filling with people. Slaves stood in quiet clusters, pretending not to look. The trader, a thick, ruddy man with a trimmed beard and a red waistcoat, leaned against his wagon, checking a ledger. Behind him sat 2 guards with rifles across their laps. Whitfield waited on the porch, his usual air of superiority unshaken. A thin smile curved his mouth when he saw me. "There he is," he said, still walking. "Remarkable." I kept my eyes forward. "Strong back," the trader said, circling me like a butcher inspecting meat. He pulled the bandage aside with a gloved hand, whistling at the scarring. "Recent punishment, I see. Still healing. He'll survive it," Whitfield said. "He's survived worse." "Does he talk?" "Only when spoken to." The trader grunted. "How old?" 32. He made a note in his ledger. "Good age. You'll get your price." I stood silent as they discussed my worth. 2 men haggling over a life. The rain had turned the yard into a patchwork of mud and puddles, and every time one of them stepped closer, I could see their reflections ripple distorted, upside down, like ghosts arguing in water. When the price was agreed upon, the trader snapped his ledger shut and nodded to his guards. They came forward with chains. "Hands," one said. I didn't move. Not yet. I looked past them toward the window of the big house. A white curtain shifted, just slightly. For a heartbeat, I saw her, Eleanor, watching, her face pale behind the glass, her eyes locked on mine. Then she vanished, the curtain falling back into place. I lifted my hands. The iron closed around my wrists with a finality that sounded like thunder. As they led me toward the wagon, I caught sight of Marcus standing near the stables. His clothes were clean, his grin small but satisfied. He nodded slightly, like a man tipping his hat after a winning hand. I wanted to hate him, truly hate him. But all I felt was sorrow. Slavery had turned us all into something less than we were meant to be. Him, me, even her. They chained my ankles next, then pushed me into the back of the wagon. The boards were rough, the smell of sweat and rust thick in the air. 2 other men sat already bound beside me, one young, his eyes wide with terror. The other older, silent, staring straight ahead. As the wagon lurched forward, the plantation began to recede behind us. The cabins, the fields, the great white house on its hill. I saw it all through the slats of the wagon, my whole world shrinking into distance. Somewhere beyond those walls was Lily. Somewhere beyond that window was Eleanor. And somewhere ahead waited the river, black and wide, carrying me toward a place from which no man returned. The road wound through dense pines. The trader rode ahead, humming a tune, the guards laughing quietly behind him. Rain dripped from the trees, pattering against the roof, canvas overhead. For a long time, none of us in the wagon spoke. We just listened to the rhythm of the wheels on the rutted road. Finally, the older man beside me said, "You from Whitfield's place?" I nodded. He grunted. "Bad man, that one. Sold 2 of mine last year." "Where are they taking us?" I asked. "New Orleans," he said. "Sugar." The word hung heavy between us. The young one started crying softly. The older man didn't look at him. "They say it kills a man in 5 years. Sometimes less. But it's work, and work's life while it lasts." I leaned my head back against the boards, letting the motion of the wagon jolt through me. My body hurt with every breath, but my mind felt strangely clear. Fear had burned itself out, leaving only a kind of hollow calm. I thought of Eleanor's last words. "She'll be here soon. Lily, coming to the same land where I'd been whipped half to death." I pictured her stepping down from the carriage in her plain dress, holding some lady's shawl. Her eyes curious, unaware that her father had been sold away days before. The thought nearly broke me. By nightfall, we reached the river crossing. The trader stopped at an inn to drink. The guards built a small fire near the bank, their laughter drifting across the water. The rest of us were left in the wagon, chained to the beams. The moon hung low and swollen, silver on the black current. I could see the ferry on the far side, a shadow moving slowly across the water. Beyond that lay the southern plantation's Hell's Edge dressed in sugarcane. Sleep wouldn't come. My back burned. My wrists ached. I closed my eyes and whispered the words that had carried me through the whipping. Love of freedom, impatient of oppression. Somewhere in the darkness, a whisper answered. At first I thought it was the wind. Then I realized it came from the trees. Solomon. It was faint, almost imagined, but I knew the voice. Eleanor. I looked up, sharply. At the edge of the clearing, half hidden by the shadows, stood a small figure cloaked in gray. She moved quickly, silently, like a spirit. In her hands she carried a bundle. The guard near the fire was half asleep. She slipped behind the wagon, her whisper urgent. "Solomon here, take this." Through the gap in the boards, she pushed the bundle inside. My fingers found it cloth, food, and something hard wrapped within. A small knife. "Eleanor," I breathed. "You shouldn't be here. They'll be watching the house at dawn," she whispered. "I couldn't." Her voice broke. "He'll say you're dead, but I'll know better. You'll find a way, Solomon. You always do. I can't run. They'll kill you if—" "Then let them," she said fiercely. "I'm already half dead here." Before I could answer, she pressed her hand against the wood. I laid mine over it from the other side. For one heartbeat, skin met skin through, splintered pine, and it felt like the whole world paused. Then footsteps approached. A guard's voice called out, "Who's there?" She vanished into the trees like smoke. The guard cursed and circled the wagon, but found nothing. I sat still, heart hammering. When he finally wandered back to the fire, I looked down at the bundle again. Inside, beneath the bread and dried meat, was a folded piece of paper, a letter, in her handwriting. For Lily, it read, "If you ever see her again, tell her her mother's name was Eleanor, and she was not afraid." I held that note against my chest until the sky began to pale. When dawn came, the trader returned and the ferry was ready. As they loaded us aboard, I looked back one last time at the trees, hoping to see her, but the woods were still, and the mist was rising. I didn't know if I'd ever make it back north. I didn't know if I'd ever see Lily again. But I knew this. I carried their names with me now, both of them, and names, once spoken, had power. As the ferry pushed off, the chains rattled like distant thunder. The river opened before us, endless and dark, but the first light of morning touched its surface, turning the black to gold. I told myself that was enough for now. The river carried us south for 7 days. 7 days of heat, sweat, and silence. The chains rubbed my wrists raw until the skin split. The air smelled of rot and wet wood, heavy with the weight of men who had been broken and sold too many times to count. The ferry became a floating cage, gliding down a black vein that cut through the heart of the South, a road of misery paved by hands like mine. I lost track of time somewhere between Montgomery and Mobile. The sun rose and fell, and the sky bled red each night before the darkness swallowed it whole. Each time I drifted into uneasy sleep, I dreamed of the plantation, of Eleanor's pale face behind the window glass, of Lily's laughter in the distance, of Marcus's shadowy grin. And every time I woke, the dreams burned away like fog, leaving only the ache in my back and the river whispering beside us. The trader didn't speak much. He chewed tobacco and spat into the current, humming to himself like a man immune to the suffering around him. The guards played cards at night, their laughter echoing off the water. The other men, 6 of us in total, kept quiet. Some prayed, some stared into the dark, their eyes empty as the river itself. On the 4th night, one of them, the older man I'd met on the wagon, leaned toward me. "You still got that fire in you," he said. "I can see it." I didn't answer. "You best learn to hide it," he continued. "Downriver, they got ways to kill fire before it spreads. I don't plan on staying long enough for that," I muttered. He looked at me, surprised. Then he smiled, not mockery, but something close to admiration. "You got someone waitin'?" "My daughter," I said quietly. "Lily." He nodded, as if he understood. "Then that's reason enough." The next morning, the river widened. The air turned thick with sugar, sweet and sickening, all at once. We passed fields that stretched farther than sight, rows of cane shimmering like knives under the sun. The trader pointed with pride. "You'll be working there soon enough," he said. "Good soil, good crop. Don't die too quick, and they'll keep you fed." I said nothing, but inside, something hardened. I thought of Eleanor's letter folded and hidden against my skin, pressed between layers of rag where the guards hadn't searched. For Lily, it read. Tell her her mother's name was Eleanor, and she was not afraid. Those words became my compass. I repeated them under my breath with every mile the river stole from me. We reached the plantation 2 days later. The overseer there was a tall, pale man with a voice like gravel. He read the trader's ledger, grunted at the place price Whitfield had fetched for me, and signed the paper without looking up. "You'll call me Mr. Gentry," he said. "You'll work the fields till you drop. Then you'll work some more." And that was that. The sugar fields were hell on earth. The work began before dawn and ended long after sunset. The air was filled with the sharp hiss of cane being cut and the groans of men too tired to cry out anymore. The lashes didn't come for punishment here, they came for pace. If you slowed, you were struck. If you stumbled, you were struck again. The heat pressed down like judgment, and the air itself seemed to shimmer with cruelty. But I didn't die. Each night, when the others collapsed into sleep, I lay awake, staring at the cracks in the ceiling, whispering to the dark. I told myself stories about Lily, that she was growing taller, that her hair was long again, that she could read by candlelight without fear. I imagined Eleanor somewhere far north, writing her own name for the first time without trembling. Months passed that way. Seasons blurred together. My scars healed into ropey ridges across my back, reminders carved into flesh. I learned the rhythm of survival, when to speak, when to stay silent, when to let the overseer's anger slide past like wind through tall grass. But the fire the old man had seen in me didn't die. It smoldered, waiting. Then, one night, something changed. The sky was low and purple with the promise of rain. The fields were empty, the air heavy with stillness. I was hauling cane toward the mill when I heard a sound so faint I thought at first it was the wind, a whistle. 3 short bursts, then one long. I froze. Every man on that plantation knew the overseer's signals, but this wasn't one of them. The sound came again, from the tree line. I glanced around. No guards in sight. My heart started to hammer. I followed the sound into the dark, keeping low, my bare feet silent in the mud. At the edge of the field, someone stepped out from the shadows. A man in rough clothes, his face half hidden by the brim of a hat. He carried no weapon that I could see, but the way he moved told me he wasn't afraid. "You, Solomon?" he whispered. I stared at him, stunned. "Who's asking?" "Friend of a friend," he said. "White lady up in Alabama sent word months back. Said if I ever found a man by your name, I was to help him north. Eleanor." The name hit me like a bell. She'd done it. She'd kept her promise. Even after everything, after the beating, after the betrayal, she'd found a way. "How?" I asked, my voice shaking. "She had means," he said simply. "Said you'd have something for a girl named Lily." I reached beneath my shirt and pulled out the folded letter. "This," I said. "It's all that's left." He nodded. "Then let's make sure it gets where it needs to go." I wanted to believe him. God, I wanted to. But the con. Fear was heavy, fear of traps, of false hope, of dying one step short of freedom. "Why risk yourself?" I asked. He smiled faintly. "Because someone once risked theirs for me." We left that night. The rain began before dawn, soft at first, then pouring. We moved through the swamp, through water up to our knees, through mud that clung to every step. We hid by day, traveling only under cover of darkness. For weeks we crept northward, through forests, through back roads, through the silent network of hands and homes that called themselves the railroad. Each stop was a miracle, a whisper, a candle in a window, a crust of bread shared by strangers who asked for nothing but silence in return. I don't remember the day we crossed into free land, only that the air felt different, lighter. The trees seemed to breathe easier. The man who guided me clapped a hand on my shoulder and said, "You made it, brother." But freedom was a strange thing. It didn't come with trumpets or sunlight or joy. It came quietly, like waking from a long sleep. My chains were gone, but the scars remained reminders of every mile that had brought me here. Months later, I found my way to Boston. I searched for a name I'd never spoken aloud in public before. Eleanor Whitfield. The woman at the post office hesitated, then nodded. "She's staying with the Summers family on Beacon Hill," she said. Beacon Hill? When I saw her again, she was standing in a garden behind a tall brick house, her hair streaked with silver, her face older but still beautiful. She turned, and for a moment, neither of us spoke. Then she smiled a real smile, soft and trembling. "You made it," she whispered. "I told you I would." She reached for my hand, and in her palm she placed another letter sealed, the handwriting small and careful. "It's from her," she said. I opened it later. Sitting by the harbor, the sea wind cool against my skin. "Papa," it began, "a kind lady told me you were alive. I am learning to write so I can tell you this myself. I remember the stories you told me about the stars. I still look for them. I still remember your hand." Tears blurred the ink, but I read every word twice. I stayed in Boston after that. worked in the shipyards, sent money where I could, though I never wrote back. It was safer that way. But every night, before I slept, I whispered their names. Eleanor, Lily. I don't know what history will make of me. Perhaps nothing at all. But I know this. The world tried to break me and failed. My daughter will live free. And somewhere, across oceans of pain and silence, the seeds we planted in ink and blood will grow. For as long as there are people to speak our names, the story won't die.